It's time for part two of my All-Star Break Sacramento Kings Media Roundtable. Jill Adge, Kenny Caraway, Brenden Nunes, and Franklin Cartoscelli back with me here. If you missed part one of our conversation on yesterday's podcast, where we focused a lot on Monte McNair's approval rating and the Domantas Sabonis Tyrese Halliburton trade, go and check that out, because on today's pod, the five of us are discussing what comes next for Monte McNair and the Kings, particularly in this upcoming offseason. We'll talk about a coaching search, and we'll weigh the best case scenario of the Kings making the play-in and going for the playoffs immediately versus trying to put themselves in the best position for high draft lottery odds. It's all on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George, and I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been covering the Kings now for 8 seasons for sports, or formerly for Sports 1140 KHTK Radio, now with ABC 10 News and Television here in the California capital. And like I said, if you missed part one, go and check that out. Part two today is really getting into the meat and potatoes of this conversation. I really enjoyed the entire conversation that I had with my 4 guests. I introduced them at the beginning of yesterday's interview, but for those of you who need a reminder or are not too familiar with these people, one, you need to be. Jill Adge is a longtime Sacramento Kings super fan, very active on Kings Twitter, has been so for years, also as the host of the Sports Ethos Kings podcast. Kenny Caraway from ESPN 1320's D-Lo and KC, which you can check out Monday through Friday from noon to 4 p.m. You can catch him there, and he joins me. Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast and the Kings Herald with us, and Franklin Cartoscelli from Sports 1140 KHTK and the Return of the Roar podcast. So those are the 4 joining me. An absolute pleasure for me to have them on now. I hope you enjoy part 2 of our media roundtable. Guys, what is a better case scenario for the final 22 or whatever games of this season? Is it Fox and Sabonis hitting it off immediately, this team winning games and making the play? And I'm not going to say playoffs, but having a chance at the playoffs through the play-in. Is that the best case scenario? Or is it the 2 of them plus DiVincenzo, Mitchell, the other guys getting a lot of minutes together, working through the rust? Maybe the wins don't come, but it's not the fault of Fox and Sabonis necessarily, and this team being a better draft lottery odds position to add a young piece to that core this offseason going into next year, which absolutely, to me, there's no excuses for next year. Absolutely playoffs or bust, which is kind of what we said about this season around a year ago. But what's the best case or better case scenario there for the remainder of the season, you think?
I think that it's a better draft pick. Like, I think you need to see built chemistry between Fox and Sabonis. Like, you can't just be getting smacked around on court for the rest of this year, obviously. But, you know, they're 3.5 games out of the 10 spot with what we have, about 20 games left, I think it is. So they do have a little bit of an uphill battle. It certainly wouldn't be bad to see them fight towards that and, you know, getting a 10 seed and getting that play-in experience if you're able to go and eventually win those 2 games and even get swept in the first round. Like, I think that's a good experience. But I think if you're talking about having a top 4 pick in this draft, that is where the team building seems so fun. And like, you just have so many options. Like, there's a good argument to keep a top 4 guy if you feel like that he'll also have somewhat of an impact now while he continues to grow. Or that asset combined with, again, Harrison Barnes or Rashawn Holmes, you never know who's going to decide that they want a change of scenery this offseason, like Brandon Ingram, Jaylen Brown. You know, I'm sure there's a handful of other names that we hear all the time that, like, to me, the asset of what a top 4 pick would mean more to this franchise than ending the playoff drought. But maybe that's just me.
No, it's just like I think having a top 4 pick for sure is the better. I would rather have a top 4 pick to make the plan, 100%. If I know I have a choice. I want top 4 or playing. I'm going top 4. The only problem with that is I don't know how the Kings get there if they're going to have this roster to a top 4 pick, because it's scary. It's kind of like what we've seen the last 3 years. The Kings have been right there, right on the cusp of making the playoffs. I believe in 2019, when they had their best season in 10, 12 years, they won 39 games. They missed the playoffs by 2 games. The bubble, they missed the playoffs by 2 games. Last year, they missed the playoffs by, I think, 3 or 4. It's scary because I feel like they're right there again. They're too good to be top 5, top 6 draft pick, but they're not good enough to be within the top 10, top 9 teams. So I think that the talent they have right now, they could make a run for the plan and it'd be really exciting, or they can fall short and they have to draft in the top 12 again. I just don't know how they get to a top 4 pick without shutting some of these guys down. Maybe they do. Maybe they lose maybe 4 of the next 5 and a phantom injury pops up for one of the big guys, and that might be how they get there. But like I was saying earlier, there's no more Lewis King, Robert Woodard, Jamias Ramsey's. There's Josh Jackson and Trey Lyles and Davion. And if you want to run down the end of the season with those guys, yeah, I think you'll get a top 4 pick. It's just, I don't know if Monty and Vivek, mostly Vivek, have that intention.
Well, the thing, like, as we've already seen, though, where we've seen these guys play well, but their opponents are better. And there's a lot of that for these last 22 games, too. So you might not even have to sit anybody, realistically, for that to happen. I mean, best case scenario, as Brenden said, you see these guys start to build something, win or lose, and they get a good asset opportunity when it comes to the pick. But I mean, too, for so long, I've been asking them, like, you keep saying you want to do this, prove it. Like, I would have a hard time being mad if they finally proved it, for the first time, that they could actually do it, because I think for someone like Fox to actually prove to himself that he can do it seems like that could, maybe spark something under him and the other guys as well. When it comes to team building, the top 4, I think, obviously would be your preferable asset building opportunity. But I would be cheering like hell if they were able to pull this off in the last 22 games, and people would really get to see what we keep saying, what this place could be like when you actually see them have that opportunity again, which we haven't, been able to show for 15 years. So as a fan in that sense, I would love to be, excited about that kind of stuff again.
Yeah, I'm a zag just a little bit here. I think the second you called the league office and made the trade for Sabonis to trade Halliburton away, your recruitment of Sabonis started. And every second has to be proving to him that this is a place where you need to be and this is where you need to stay, and we're doing something. So, like the draft pick, I mean, it would be cool. Like, I even look at it like this. James Ham mentioned it on the show, and I kind of agree with him. I think it's probably less than 50% they even keep the pick, so it's an asset right now. But everything that you do for the next, I guess he's eligible for an extension after next season, is to say, hey, Sabonis, we're going in the right direction. You want to be here. We can win here. We can get this done. And just for Monty's job and the sanity of everybody, you want to make, like, if Sabonis is playing well, Fox is playing well, I find it hard to believe that they lose enough games to get a top 5 pick. You know what I mean? Like, if they're losing games to get a top 5, top 4 pick, then they got a whole lot more problems than just losing games. Like, Fox and Sabonis don't work. They're not on the right path. It creates so many more problems. Whereas if they have a strong finish to the season, and obviously, hopefully you make some type of plan, but if you're a game or two short, I feel like that's something that you could build on with the guys that you have here. You can look at Fox and Sabonis and be like, you know what? This isn't a failed experiment. We just didn't have enough time. Let's get ourselves together for next year, and let's make a run at this next year. So I just kind of look at it like that. Everything that Brenden said, all you guys said was was on point, and I understand it, but I just think it's imperative to prove now to Domantas Sabonis that this is a place where you can be long-term and you can be successful and you can be part of a winner. And I think that started the day he took the floor against Minnesota.
Can I pitch this to you guys? I'm curious where you guys are at with this, because I think this is where the trade becomes a little suspect when you actually like sit and go through the standings, and it's like a full year of this team. Where are they sitting in the standings? Like, you just traded away what is probably, I don't know, maybe I take some issue with people that say Tyrese is the best player, but there are certainly moments where Tyrese has been the best player this season. You just traded away that guy. You would have had 7 years of team control for these 2 years left of Sabonis, and Sabonis is a damn good player, like we all said. But when you sit there and look, like, if you had a full year with this team, where are you in the Western Conference standings? The 6-seeded Nuggets are getting back Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. next season. The Clippers are getting back Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. The Trailblazers have a lot of money they're working with, and we'll have to see which direction they go in. The Lakers are, if Anthony Davis gets healthy, like, the Spurs could continue to get better. Like, I think that there's still somehow a world where you're looking at the Western Conference standings with this entire roster that I think we all agree is an improved team. But I'm like, man, are they even still just fighting for the play-in next year?
Well, that's why this has to be step one. It has to be. Like, you have to do what the Cleveland and Chicago did. Like, he can't have last offseason be this offseason. You can't make that move and then not be extremely aggressive in your follow-ups.
Mm-hmm.
You have to hit everything else now for that to be a win. Right. And to me, that kind of makes me excited, because I don't see you making that move if you're not going to be extremely aggressive in your follow-ups.
And
this place is going to burn.
Seriously. The thing about it is you got moves still to be made, right? You've got a Rashawn Holmes, you've got your draft pick. You did all this. That was, obviously the key to all this is you were able to do this without moving on from the first round pick. So you have that in your back pocket. You have a decision that you can make with Harrison Barnes if you want to. So there's still pieces to be moved with this particular trade. I think with this team, the 4 games or whatever says they're a 500 team. I don't know if they're a 500 team with this all year, but I think they're better than all the teams that they're fighting for 10 with. I think they're better than this Lakers team. They can get into that 7-8 range or whatever with this particular team. I still think they're a player short. Like, they need another player to elevate to another place, and that's where Monty's got to do some work in the offseason. But if they made this trade 4 weeks ago, I think they're easy with this particular team. They're easily in the playing scenario right now.
Yeah, you look back at all the awful losses they've had, just horrible, horrific, whether it be the 2 missed free throws from Fox. It's a 1-point loss, which I know that's not, it's the people want to point to that, but point is so many bad losses. You have to imagine, or in my mind, I know that they would be a better team than they are right now. And I don't think that's saying too much. Admit they'd probably be like in the 9-10 right now if this was their roster the whole year. But yeah, like, for next year, there's more moves to be made, like we said. And the fact is this, though, they have their guys. They get to go into the offseason with the core of De'Aaron, Sabonis, DiVincenzo, and Davion. The rest of that, everyone else is on the table. And that's kind of the fun part. That's a lot of things that the fan base should be excited for. And the fact that the Kings can maybe end the year with some noise and go into the next year with some momentum. And that's kind of the biggest takeaway. Like Jill said, this having something to build off of. The Kings, we're talking about a 39-win season here in 2019. That's what people are looking back to as the golden era of the 16-year drought. Was the scores are here, which that was fun. That was great. But it'd be a lot more fun if they could kind of roll into this next 6-7 weeks with some momentum. And we saw what happened with the Suns in the bubble. And was that direct correlation? I like to think so. You come in the bubble and just sweep and win every game. Come in the next year, you go to the finals. So it's an interesting time. It's just gonna be an interesting time, like always here.
And that's kind of the thing. Like, you brought up the Chris Webber thing, and everyone loves to bring that up. But no one loves to bring up that after they got Chris Webber, all of the moves they made that offseason, in addition to that, you had Jason Williams, Peja was finally coming over.
When
When
they get John Barry and Vernon Maxwell.
There was John Barry,
Yeah.
and there were like 3 kind of bench guys that they got. And I mean, it was like there ended up being
Pollard.
5 or 6 moves that like all coincided together, similar
was
that we
Bobby's
saw with
first
the
year too,
Chicagos and the Clevelands. And so again, like we all go back to that, the big move, but I don't think anything still happens with that move if you don't, hit on those follow-ups. And so to me, like we keep saying, that's gonna be I think the hit or miss of what happens after this.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Bet Online. Football might be over this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. And from all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where to find the next coach is going to land, the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, your podcasts, and your news this season. And it's not just basketball, of course. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, and even had a bunch of Olympic coverage as well. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. It absolutely is what Jill's saying. It is step one. But I think to Brendan's point, the concern that I might have, I do have, is if the Kings are going to really make that step, they can't just add complementary pieces. They need another big piece. It doesn't have to be on the level of a Sabonis or a De'Aaron Fox necessarily, but they need another big piece. And what are you using to get that big piece that doesn't make it almost a net neutral deal? Like, to me, we love to compare to the Chicago Bulls, which is fantastic. The Chicago Bulls pulled off a sign and trade of DeMar DeRozan, who's playing like an MVP right now. The Kings notoriously in free agency are terrible. It's just that's the way it is. So I hesitate saying, the Kings will just go and get that guy in free agency. It's probably coming either in the draft or in the trade, which of course you could use the draft to your advantage in a big trade. You have a guy like Richaun Holmes that has value that I think you can move on for, but what can you really get for him? If you want to pull the trigger on trading away Harrison Barnes, I get you can get better than Harrison, but he's also a solid rock and part of this team that I don't think is necessarily as easy to replace as some people may think going forward. So I think the concern is, and I appreciate Monty, he's finally lived up to what he said. When he first came in, he said, we want to stay flexible so that when a player like Sabonis becomes available, we can be contenders for him. And lo and behold, they were able to get him. I applaud McNair for that, because past general managers wouldn't even have tried, because it's just Sacramento and they're afraid to lose their jobs. But now he has to live up to it and then some, and really work against the reputation and the history of the Kings in the offseason, which is an inability to make a big move like that. When the Kings have made big trades in the past, it's really been in season, and the biggest trades that I can point to are like the DeMarcus Cousins trade or like the Rudy Gay trade of a number of years ago. Those happened in season. Off-season wise, and maybe I'm missing something here, I can't remember the Kings making a big splash in the offseason, and I think it's going to take maybe not massive, but a significant splash for this team to really be in the position to say, oh yeah, we're a playoff team next year. And I think they kind of have to be that with a 2-time All-Star in Sabonis now with De'Aaron Fox.
Yeah. This is where I look at the Phoenixes, the Clevelands, of the people that kind of did it outside of that, right? Like Phoenix had enough of the core, like fundamentally really good pieces that you add Chris Paul to, and even with Chris Paul out, now we're going to see what those guys are really made of. But I mean, they had been playing really well. Cleveland, nobody thought anything of those mesh of guys together. And look what happens when you have a bunch of tall, 6'8" and above guys that can play inside and outside. I do think that, yes, it's going to take another big piece, but I think he's kind of shown too that, at least so far through the draft, he's been able to kind of find those guys that are fundamentally sound, that can, that are going to last in the league. And that's something that this team has been missing. When they get guys, it's like, okay, this guy, he's going to leave Sacramento and he's not going to last, right? Like, everyone loves to make fun of us that players need to just get out of Sacramento and they'll be fine. But we have maybe a handful of guys in the last 15 years that have been fine once they left. plenty of them are, are out of the league. And so he needs to make, I think you have the homes, you have all your draft picks, no matter where they fall. And you have Barnes being your biggest, kind of trade pieces out there. And I will even say Fox could still be that big piece too. If somebody even bigger than him becomes available, we have seen. I'm not sold that he wouldn't make that move either. You know what I mean? Like that he wouldn't hesitate to do something there. So,
and here's the other thing, and I mean it's a low bar, I guess, but I think realistic. If you look at this team, and they kept Halliburton, this franchise was hopeless. Like there was hopeless. Like as much as I love Halliburton, they didn't have the setup with that roster with Fox and Halliburton because I didn't think that was going to do nothing for you. Then you had Richaun Holmes starting at center. That's a tough sell. You still didn't have a power forward. You still didn't know what you were going to do with Davion Mitchell and where his minutes were going to come from. So like where do you get better? Because you need, at that point, you probably need a starting center. You still need a power forward. And that backcourt, I don't know, you probably need a shooting guard or a point guard, one of the two. But who are you giving up? Fox? Like it was hopeless. Now you got moves. You got a legit starting center. I'll just keep the two-time All-Star at center. You got that. You've got your all-star talent player back at point guard. Now you also, we talk about Fox's resurgence, you got a little resurgence from Harrison Barnes. So now you've got your starting small forward back. So now you going into this offseason, you got to figure out what I'm going to do at the small forward spot, or excuse me, at the power forward spot and at the shooting guard spot. And I just feel that's a little manageable, a little more digestible than looking at this roster and being like, all right, like think about Indiana. If you're Indiana, you got Halliburton, you need everything. You need everything. Like Duarte's cool. You need a small forward. You need a power forward. Miles Turner is kind of like Richaun Holmes. Like they're not turning this around in 2 years, at least with Sacramento. Maybe they aren't either. But you got hope. You got moves. You've got a foundation, it feels like, to be able to build off of. That's just the way I see it.
Boy, it would be a disaster though if the Pacers make the playoffs before the Sacramento Kings do. I tell you what, and
No,
I wouldn't.
Fitting. That's what it would be.
I'm not even going to put that out into the universe. I take it back. I don't even want to talk about that stuff. But how much, guys? Matt. I know. I'm sorry. It's just it's a natural.
Buddy Hield's an all-star next year.
Stop. You're just saying what we've all thought.
Stop.
All right, that's Brenden Nunes. We'll let him go, and we'll just do a 4-man show for the remainder of this. Now, guys, the last thing that I had is we're talking about offseason moves and the addition to this roster, which is extremely important. But how much is this upcoming, really, hopefully, full coaching search play into the success of this team going forward? I personally, as much as I like Alvin Gentry and I appreciate him, I don't think he has really a shot. He'll be involved in the interview process. I don't think he has much of a shot. I don't know if you guys have candidates out there, names that you'd be interested in. Jill, you are the queen of when the Kings have a vacancy, you'll put together a list of about 400 different people that end up being fantastic elsewhere and the Kings don't hire them. So Jill, if you have names to throw out there that you think would be great, guys, if you think, and just the idea of, like, we know this is a players league and coaches are more fall guys than anything else, but the right coach with this group going forward, I think could make a massive difference immediately this offseason and next year.
Yeah, I'm excited for my summer when that comes.
So are we.
Yeah, no, I've already put a couple up, and I'll probably bring them back up again over the summer. I don't know if my Sam Cassell has. I was more so when the thought of Fox and Halliburton kind of going, but again, I still think to go to the next level, you're going to need Fox and Davion to be, just as big as those other guys. And he is that guard whisperer, and has done nothing but win as a player and as a coach. And so he just seems to have the respect of everybody, and his resume, I think, stands for itself. And what he's been able to do with all the guards under his wings, no matter whether it be Washington, the Clippers, and now the Sixers, you see them all flourish and win. I think that's huge. You have your Kenny Atkinson, who does nothing but take teams that people think won't, be maybe much of anything and make them succeed and bring out the best in everybody. So I think that, we could all use that here. You have your Darvin Ham and Adrian Griffin, who've done nothing but be assistants for 10 plus years under winning, organizations and coaches, and some of the best in the league credit them for being where they are in the league today. So again, you have your scheme and your player development guys. And so there's a lot of options. You have Rick Adelman's son, David Adelman, running the almost Princeton offense in Denver right now under Jokic. That seems very appealing for a, Sabonis type player that we now have in Kingsland. And so, that would be a hell of a full circle moment if he was ever to, to get that kind of position again here. But to me, what's exciting is there's a lot of names out there, and now you have a lot of new pieces to work with. And so I think not even just hitting on a name is going to be important. It's finding the right scheme and something that all of these guys are going to excel at to take you to that next step and actually believe in it and build it, right? Like none of this. And that's why I'm excited. Monty will seemingly get his guy, right? We kind of heard last year that it was Chris Finch of all people, right? Who ended up getting hired by Minnesota. And I would think he would stay there based on what he's doing now. But again, you never know. And now we have a big man, which he, seems that's kind of been his role in the league, is excelling with bigs. He was with Anthony Davis and Boogie in New Orleans. And then they brought him over to Denver to, help grow Jokic. And then now he's in Minnesota with Towns. And so who knows what'll happen there? Seemingly he has them playing really well, so I don't see them letting him go. But that is a name, right, that none of us ever thought of. And then we heard after the fact saying that, oh, if he was available, Luke probably would have been gone, and that's the guy you would have hired. So I'm excited about the options, right? And a real search seemingly for the first time.
That's what I was going to say.
In the Vivek era. When
was the last time?
Did
they do a full search for Jaeger? Did Jaeger? I feel like they did a couple, then they just gave him the job immediately.
Vlade did a bunch of interviews, but as Ham and a bunch of other people said, it wasn't even necessarily his guy. Like he became available, and it was like we're getting him. And granted,
immediately.
It worked, towards the end.
That was the year they wanted Luke Walton, though, and he said, no, I'm going to the Lakers. And then Jaeger became available, and the Kings just scooped him up. No, the Kings have not undergone a full coaching search in years, which is crazy to think about how many coaches have been in this freaking city and how many of them have just been hired on a whim. So
the Carl thing.
The first Malone was the first hire was Malone, and that was Vivek. It wasn't even a GM. And so
before Pete,
the only interviews we had was that one version of Lottie, and then we found out later it wasn't his. And so this will be the true GM's first in what, 8-9 years. So
God.
Yeah. I'm gonna leave all the names to Jill. She's definitely the one for that.
But there's a lot more. So be excited for this. There's a lot more names.
I'm sure. I bet Luke Walton is available.
Brenden, that's strike
much
two.
Going on.
Matt, that's
bring
strike
back
two.
Dave Yeager. Bring back Dave Yeager.
Yeah. Why not? See what all these guys got going on. But I think there's going to be a lot of good options. I would be surprised to see Alvin come back unless they absolutely kill it with the rest of this season. And maybe that's in the cards. Like Alvin is a really creative offensive coach, and we've seen some flashes of the Kings looking like one of the better passing teams in the league, albeit over 4 or 5 games. But I'm going to go ahead and take my little bit of optimism and overreaction there since it's so rare. But I think that a coaching improvement is really crucial to this team moving forward. Like Monty Williams, as much as Chris Paul was the guy in Phoenix, I think also having that leadership voice alongside CP3 on the floor and Monty Williams in the locker room was a big impact there. And a lot of times I think that you see these improvements with coaching. And to me, it's less of there are these coaches where you're clearly helping your team win games. And then I think there's this really big middle pack where they're just kind of middle. Yeah, I'm just going to go with middle of the pack coaches. And then there's the couple, like probably 4 or 5 at the bottom where it's like, man, I think you're actually contributing to losses a little bit here. And the Kings more often than not have had coaches in that last group. So even just jumping into the middle tier of coaching, I think would be a pretty big upgrade for this team. I thought it was going to be the biggest change of last offseason and where some improvement would be. I think it'd be weird of McNair to, I don't know how much I believe like that was fully McNair's decision. And he was like really riding with Walton going forward or anything. So I think that is going to be a really big decision here this offseason.
This episode of Locked On Kings, as many episodes of Locked On Kings, are brought to you by Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. I know that now that we're in the end of February, some of you have taken those New Year's resolutions to eat healthier or to go and work out at the gym more and just be overall healthier. You've probably thrown those out the window, but don't worry. There's so much time this year still for you to get back on that horse. And to help you, there are Built Bars that check so many boxes. If you have a sweet tooth, and we all have a sweet tooth, allow Built Bar to replace those candy bars that you love so much in a much healthier way. Candy bars on average have around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Built Bars have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. So they're perfect for before or after a workout if you're trying to put on muscle, if you're trying to lose weight. Built Bars do it all. And they also come in a multitude of great flavors covered in 100% chocolate, soft, easy to chew, absolutely delicious. Like I said, healthy for you. And there are a lot for you to try, so you really won't get bored. If you go to built.com and order a mixed box for your first box, they'll send you a bunch of different flavors for you to try. You can also see all their new flavors that they're coming out with there all the time. Or you can order your own custom box at any time where they'll send you the bars that you pick that you might have identified as your favorite. Like for mine example is the mint brownie bar is my absolute favorite. So go and check out those bars, and whatever you order on built.com, make sure you use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
You guys, I'm just listening to you guys. You guys are do the coaches thing, man. That's not my lane, man. You know, I'm more of a roster guy. So I'll ask you guys this. Do you think that there needs to be some talk or conversation with Fox and Sabonis about who they bring in?
I feel like that's healthy, right? I mean, I feel like that's healthy. If those are your guys you're going to build around, I feel like we've seen a lot of people. I mean, Damian Lillard, I think he selected Chauncey himself, if I'm not mistaken. I think. I mean, the people, they go to their stars to ask what they think. And I think it would be nice, some nice due diligence on Monty's part to say, hey, do you like Kenny Atkinson? Okay. Do you like, I think Sam Cassell, we have Sam Cassell's name that you mentioned, Jill. What do you guys think? That I don't think it'd be the worst thing in the world to check with those guys versus hiring someone who maybe it's not quite De'Aaron's coaching fit. Maybe he doesn't love the fit. Maybe Sabonis doesn't love it. The last thing you need is more disgruntled players in the locker room. That's just the thing I'd say. And the guys that you want to be here, make sure they're happy.
Yeah.
I think the word that you used, Frankie, healthy is 100%. And Brenden, I'm sure you have more to add on this as well. Just thinking about, like, I even asked Monty McNair at the press conference how much Fox was involved potentially in the decision to trade for Domantas Sabonis, because we know that Fox has been asking for help for a while. And to Jill's point earlier in the pod, the only help that the Kings have really given Fox is 2 other ball handlers through the draft. So I think it's 100% healthy. Don't make the decision based off of what Fox and Sabonis want, but there's no reason to me. If a guy's coming in for a second or third interview, hell, Vivek already likes to have 20 people in that room. Might as well add Fox and Sabonis to that too, and have them sit across the table from each other and say, hey, this is what we can do together. This is what I envision for the 2 of you if you guys go with me, and have that discussion. I think that's incredibly healthy, Frankie.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that just involving them in the discussion rather than, them getting the final say is important, because ultimately this should be all aligned with what Monty's vision of the team is, even if maybe we come to realize that Monty isn't great at this. I think it's still undetermined. But I think that everybody needs to be on the same page if we're going to even be able to find out. So it's got to be a guy that aligns with Monty's system. And I think as long as Fox and Sabonis don't hate the idea, like if winning fixes everything, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a fine line, like you said, of having them involved rather than the decision making. And it doesn't need to necessarily be public, because we've seen how the last two played out very public. Of these guys don't like to get yelled at, they don't like to get their feelings hurt, and then they want the players coach, but then they don't listen to the players coach. So I mean, it adds a bunch of other narratives that don't necessarily need to be there. So I just hope that they're smart and clean about it and do whatever you have to do. I would venture to guess almost every place has that conversation with their core of, when you're in those kind of final stages of getting those kind of feelers out. But at the end of the day, the GM should be making that call and not anybody else.
Yeah, I think like a dream pairing would be like Tyrese Halliburton, Rick Carlisle. It would just really work.
Buddy Hield.
He's gone.
He's
gone.
That's
I
strike.
got him. He's gone.
That's strike three.
We can't do it.
That's strike three, Brenden. That's strike three, man.
Rick
had to get the
Carlisle,
third one
Buddy
in.
Hield. That would absolutely be a dream pairing. Yes.
It's true. Yeah.
Now wait a minute.
O'Shea Brissett. This is perfect.
Lance Stevenson, bring them all. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
If you give De'Aaron a choice for coach, he's gonna say, "Hey, Vivek, let's lure Cal out of Kentucky. Let's give him the check he wants. Bring him to Sac."
It's, that should be a joke, but the amount of times we've actually had that conversation here in Sacramento is enough for me to feel disgusted by that. But as we wrap up here, I feel so much pride when we do roundtables like this, because there are so many good people, so many smart people that are here in Sacramento, not just as media members who cover the team, but as part of the fan base. It's a joke, but it's kind of not a joke too. It's good that fans don't run a team, but the Kings might have been in a better spot a number of times had Sacramento Kings fans and some media members run this team. But to have the four of you join me, plus the other great media members that I've had on these roundtable before, other guests of the Locked On Kings podcast, all the great podcasts, radio shows, TV shows that cover the Kings, it really is a pleasure for me to be a part of. So guys, thank you so much for joining me. This is fun, and hopefully we'll do this again either after the Kings make the play-in / playoffs this offseason, or after the Kings get a top pick this offseason, or regardless, we're going to have to do this again during the offseason, because I have a feeling there's going to be some fireworks. But thank you guys so much. It really was a total pleasure for me to have the four of them on for this Kings Media Roundtable. And based off the reaction to part one, a lot of you seem so interested and to enjoy it a lot. A lot of you joined the conversation, which I absolutely appreciate. These are things that I would love to do more and have different Kings Media members on. I've done a couple of media roundtables going back to last season and last off season, but this one was especially good. So if you want more of this kind of content, please let me know. I'll definitely do one this upcoming off season. You can tell me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section if you're watching down below. So check out all of the other Kings roundtables that I've done, and make sure you let me know if you want me to do more. And check out the work of the four of my guests here today. They're just phenomenal people. And I meant what I said there at the end. I feel so much pride for putting together episodes like this and being able to work with so many great people in the Kings media scene. And hopefully we can continue those relationships going forward. If you haven't left a review of the Locked On Kings podcast, if you could please do that, that would be fantastic. Apple Podcasts or iTunes, the best place to do that. Hit 5 stars. There's a little box for a custom review of yours, why you would encourage others to listen to Locked On Kings. It helps us out a ton if you could do that. And if you're listening on Spotify, there's now a star system there. Hit 5 stars, of course, if you think the show is worthy of that rating. I really would appreciate it. And of course, I'd appreciate you joining me on tomorrow's Locked On Kings podcast, where I'm scheduled to be joined by Rafael Barlow of Locked On NBA Draft. He is going to give us an early preview of this draft class. If there's any names that he thinks would be a perfect fit for the Kings, we won't just talk about the names at the top of the draft. We'll talk about the names in the late lottery range where the Kings might end up if they go for the play-in and playoffs like I think they are. And if there are some names in that range that could really be difference makers for the Kings as early as next season for that playoff push. So we'll discuss all of that. I hope you'll join me for that. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.